And if we use any portion of this recording on socials or emails, it will be, if one of you is speaking, we will get your permission first, and you can always say no. But more than anything, what the recording is going to be used for is to give back to you in case you want a copy of it. And of course, for anyone that registered and missed. So all of you will get an email when we're done today, and you will get lots of resources. I'm going to give you tons of resources. You're going to get an ebook. You're going to get some articles. You're going to get a copy of this. And so I'll mention those resources at the end, and then I'll just put them all in an email. I was putting them in the chat, but it's so much easier just to do it in an email afterwards. So welcome to Working Virtually. And I might look like I'm slightly distracted. It's only because I'm admitting people to from the waiting room into the Zoom. So please pardon that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can all get started. So once again, welcome to this interactive webinar, 3 keys to make working at home positive and productive experience, also known as Working Virtually. This session is here to give you practical tips to help you really help you stay positive, or to maybe get a little bit more positive in the face of remote work, which can be a major change in the work environment. Now, I know what some people are thinking. Shannon, we've been working remotely for 8 months, and I get it. I hear you, and it makes sense if you're having that reaction. What we've noticed in working with our clients is that even though we've been working remote for some of us for 7-8 months on a regular basis, not everybody is adjusting. And we wanted to make sure that we could reach out to the community, to our clients and others alike, and provide some just high-level tips, some options, different ways of thinking of what's going on, and provide these 3 keys that might help create a little bit more positivity and productivity. So if you're like me, working from home, I really thought this was going to be more temporary. And what I mean by that is, when it first happened back in March, I was just, it's not because I didn't take the virus seriously, take it very, very seriously, but I guess because I'm a half glass full person, I was really thinking, oh, come May, June, we'll be able to get back together again. We'll be able to get back in the office again. And then May came around, and that was definitely not the case, right? And now it's continuing. And now we're learning, which I think a lot of scientists predicted, which is as the weather cools down, as people are staying indoors a little bit more, as testing improves, we've got increased cases. All of those things are going on. We all still need to be very, very careful. Long story short, working from home, this is going to be what we're doing for a while for those that have the option within their work environment to actually do that. So this is a reality that we all need to face. Sorry, I've got a couple in the waiting room that for some reason it's not letting me click. There we go. And so we thought it would be a great opportunity to really reach out and provide some support to folks. For those of you who've never joined Relay on any of our training sessions and you're not familiar with our organization, my name is Shannon Lee. I'm the Executive Director. And we are a learning and development organization based right here in Columbus, Ohio. I am a born and bred Buckeye. I went to The Ohio State University. I have spent my career in education and then in adult education. And so this is just a passion of mine, and I'm doing this so that I can help my fellow professionals feel supported, give them ideas on shifting mindsets, and even some practical tips on making working from home a little bit more positive. When we reached out to many of our clients, what we found was that you kind of have 2 categories. You have folks who are really rocking it in the virtual world. They've got control of the tools. They've got all the support that they need. They were able to create a home office and feel pretty comfortable. And then you have the folks that are still struggling, and they're struggling for various reasons. But here's the thing. If you're someone who really feels like you have a strong handle on what's going on, you may forget that there are others on your team, others that work for you, that are still struggling. They're still feeling tension around these things. And when they see you thriving, they may not feel like they can reach out and say, hey, I still need help with this. I don't understand how to use this tool, whatever. It's nothing that you've done to create that. It's just the nature that it's just inherent in what we're doing. And I'll explain what I mean by that, why we're experiencing this discomfort and how unnatural some of this might be. By the time you leave this webinar, you'll know what you need to start building good habits for working remotely if you haven't already started building them. And if you are a remote working pro, my hope is that this webinar will help you walk away with tools to help your colleagues. If you have direct reports, for you to help your direct reports. If you have to manage up, this will be a different way for you to think about maybe some of the challenges that your leadership is facing. So it's really great to be with you here today, and I really honor and value your time. And so we will finish right at 1 o'clock. Just a couple quick notes that this is interactive. The way we're going to interact is we're going to use the first two. We're not going to use the raise hand too much, but I'm going to ask you to chat with me. It just saves more time than verbal responses. If we had a smaller group, we could do that. But once you get over 3, 4, or 5 people, it's really better to just use the electronic tools. So a couple times I'll ask you to chat, and you'll see that I'll verbally recognize it or ask you to do it. And then you'll also see this little emblem here. And then sometimes I'll ask you to use your annotate tools to type or to put a check mark on the screen. If you are operating from, let's say, behind, some employers have stricter firewall requirements, especially as it pertains to Zoom. Maybe you don't have full access to all of the tools in Zoom, and so you can't use the annotate. I'll just invite you to put your answers in chat because I believe everyone has access to the chat. So we want to leverage these tools so that we can connect and, of course, model what some of the things I'm going to be sharing with you about connection. So this hour isn't a session on washing your hands and social distancing. I hope you're doing those two things. You need to be doing those two things, among many others. But we want to help you create and or support the good habits that will help you engage effectively at work with your manager, your team, vendors, customers, colleagues, you name it. While everything we're sharing today, I believe, is common sense, it's still not common practice. Let's face it, it's not intuitive, nor is it natural to be spending so much time in front of the camera for a bunch of us on this webinar. Some of us, maybe we do this for a living, or some of us, I know for myself, I do tons of video sessions even before 2020. We have online learning, and so I'm used to creating videos for social media. But even myself, I'm not used to being in front of a camera all day long on Zoom meetings. And so this is still not a natural environment for many of us. And so it's not so much being on camera then, it's the long periods of time. It's the necessary over communication to make sure that even the smallest of tasks are taken care of, because now we can't look across the office and see if someone's working on something. We have to trust that they are. And the other big piece is, you know, we haven't really, unless we've always been in a virtual environment, we haven't had to think about our digital brand being impacted by trustworthiness in the workplace because of everyone being remote. And so these are somewhat new concerns that all of us are still dealing with. Now, the desire to really contain the spread and the impact of COVID-19, even though some of us thought this was going to be more temporary, some of you have learned through your employer that your remote working environment is going to be more permanent, or at least you have the option for that permanence. It's led more organizations to require people to work from home. I know that there are some jobs that that's just not possible, but the other thing that's impacting this is a lot of organizations had work from home policies, but those policies were not prioritized because the vast majority of their associates were not working from home, and no one could have prepared for having policies to work from home full-time, everybody being at home full-time, as well as now we've got our kids at home. We might have a significant other also working in the home, or roommates, what have you, all these interruptions. What kind of policies, what kind of expectations can we place on associates when it comes to this environment where we've got this full-time home remote working? So it's urgent now because, as you've heard this phrase before, this is the new normal, but it's still not commonplace the way we're dealing with it. So I want you to think about working from home then versus now. Use your annotate tools and put a checkbox or check one of the boxes of how often did you work from home last year versus how often do you work from home now? And if you do not have access to the annotate tools, hop into chat and just kind of give me a sentence that the first part is what you did last year and the second part of the sentence is a choice from the second group, what you're doing now. For me, I probably worked from home a few days each month last year, and I'm currently working every day from home. So how about you? Let's see how these populate. You know, working from home for some of you isn't a huge change, or working virtually. Many workers are accustomed to this on maybe an intermittent basis, some on a regular basis. It's been reported that 43% of Americans work from home occasionally, and at least 5.2%, about 8 million people, work from home full time. However, there's a big difference between working full time or from working from home occasionally and, you know, from your kitchen table, maybe a few hours a day or a couple days a month, to setting up a home office and having everything you need at your disposal. So let's see how things have changed. So it looks like most of you, and I want to look in the chat so I'm not missing any of those responses. Never to a few days each month last year. And then now we're looking at, let's see, we've got a few days, 1 or 2 days a week, and a lot of you are at that everyday mark. Yeah, that's pretty common. That was same with our 9 a.m. group as well. Let me go in here and clear all of these. Thank you for your responses. I appreciate that. So often we can be pretty enthusiastic. I know a lot of people I knew were so pumped that their day-to-day 9 to 5, they got to do it from their home in their pajamas, at least maybe pajamas from their waist down, and from the waist up, they had on a blouse like I do, or a dress shirt or something like that, a nice cardigan. There was a lot of excitement in the beginning, and that makes sense, right? Casual Friday every day, the ability to multitask, right? I had 30 minutes between my last meeting and this meeting, and I took that time to let my dogs out and give them a little bit of love, a little scratch on the head. And then I was able to come back in here and have another appointment. If I'd been in an office all day, they'd be cooped up in their crate, right? So that does allow me to multitask a little bit and to do some things during the day I didn't have the opportunity to do before. But what a lot of us realized was we kind of hit a wall. And reality started to hit, whether it's children at home, maybe they're preschool age or even younger, all the way to school age, whatever that may be, elementary, middle, high school, even college age students, roommates. There could be other family members in other generations living with us. Also, other family members working from home in the same space. The home is now filled with more distractions than ever. And so I can imagine many of you have experienced those distractions, but all of those distractions can create some personal challenges from working from home. So let's talk about challenges first. Hop in the chat again and let me know what are some of the challenges you've been facing working from home. Hopefully you're not looking like this person face down on the bed with chocolate and pizza, although I'm not gonna lie, that doesn't sound like the worst thing that could happen. So let me know what your challenges have been working from home. We're working remotely. Some people express that they're working in a remote location that's not their home. Eating all the time. Stepping away from it because it's always there. Yeah, trying to kind of disconnect, finding a breaking point. Access to the kitchen. Lack of feedback from peers. Yeah, Jason, that communication piece is really lacking if we're not intentional. Creating a separate workspace. 3 dogs wanting attention. Partner working at home in the same room on calls, that can be that can be almost impossible. Eating more and even eating less if I didn't have time to cook. Yeah, especially Sarah, if your day is kind of bleeding into the evening time when normally you would have shut the door in your office, gotten in your car and driven home. Keeping windows closed because of neighbors, we hear sessions. Oh, that's a good point. You know, I do some, obviously I'm not a therapist, but I do executive coaching. That's a very good point. Working overtime, not enough exercise, feeling isolated, spouse interrupting because you're in the line of sight. Yep. Short-term problem, we've got some no heat, no water. That is very distracting with people working on your home. Signing in at 10 p.m. To try to get caught up working. I hear a lot of people doing that, Sarah, especially if they have children at home and they're trying to work through the whole virtual school thing. No walks between meetings, back-to-back meetings. Yeah, no disconnecting after work. It's hard to find that separation for sure. A lot of these were already mentioned. We came up with a few, the isolation, problems with technology. Oh, I want to mention this one. No joking with coworkers randomly, no drive-bys for info. That is so, so true. I've got a couple ideas on how you can somewhat pull that back in. We'll get to that later. Other challenges, problems with technology. You all mentioned working too much or too late, the interruptions, staying motivated and focused. You know, we all have different personality types. Some of us are very driven and we thrive in autonomous environments. Other people, not so much. One's not bad and the other good. It just is. And so for some of us, being in an office environment and feeling the hum and really the rhythm of that activity helps us stay motivated and focused. Setting boundaries, it interferes with family time. The trust piece, keeping and building trust with managers, remote colleagues. The health habits, you mentioned some exercise. There could be other bad health habits developing. I heard someone mention in the previous session, having a little mimosa in the morning and that got out of hand, or kind of happy hour was happening a little bit earlier every day and they had to get a hold of that and dial that back a little bit. And then of course, multiple people at home. Lack of culture alignment, that's an interesting one, Jason, because in this environment, we almost have to, I don't want to say redefine our culture, but create some alignment around what does our culture, how do we operate in this environment and what's acceptable, what isn't, what are our boundaries. So those are all some things that hopefully we'll get to. We won't get to all of these, but we'll touch on quite a few of them. Now we've covered a lot of them in the chats, but I do think that there are some benefits. I mean, I've heard some people say that one benefit is a reduction in their like self-grooming. And so it's kind of a silly picture here, and hopefully you're still brushing your teeth in the morning. But one of the biggest benefits is just the time that it takes to get ready. Some people are expressing that they don't really feel the need to maybe put on a full face of makeup or do their hair as often or as much. Sometimes they can just turn that camera off. And so there are some benefits in addition to the challenges. So let's talk about those for a minute. And again, hop into chat. What are some benefits that you've experienced with working remotely? I'd love to hear about those. Two new dogs since you're always home. Saving time on the commute. Yeah, all this rain we've had the last couple of days. How many of you are glad you're not on 71 in that? Saving gas. If you lease your car, you're not going over your miles this year. Wear and tear on cars, saving on that, not having to drive 45 minutes to and from work. Less sickness. That's interesting. No one said that before, but that's true. More time with my kids and family. No office flu going around. Bought my first house since I didn't want to spend this much time in the old house. It's interesting that you say that because my husband's in the roofing business, and we were concerned back in March, of course, what was this going to bring about? You know, were construction-related industries going to tank? And they have had a record year. And part of what we're seeing in construction, this is anecdotal. This is not, I haven't researched this at all. What he's hearing from customers and homeowners is that they're at home so much that they're paying more attention to the home improvements that they need, and or they realize their house is not sufficient for the needs that they have for working, and so they're deciding to move. Getting more chores done. Yeah, I'll throw a load of laundry in right before I start a meeting, and then when it's over, I can then go throw it in the dryer. Guess what? I don't have to do that on Saturday now. Yeah, so these are some great benefits. Some of the ones that that I believe we've covered most of these: the flexibility, increased productivity, greater autonomy, personal cost savings, and this better work-life integration. I do want to note, though, I do believe some of these top benefits are only realized when we're disciplined, structured, and we feel connected. That connection piece is going to be so important. And some people may think that productivity is taking a little bit of a hit, and I think maybe in the beginning it did because we were all trying to figure this thing out. The research is actually showing that productivity can actually increase when working remotely. According to this study, which if you look at the bottom of the slide, and again, you're going to get a copy of a lot of this. Why won't that move? Its source is called Does Working from Home Work? Out of Stanford Institute. And they have found that there's a 13% increase in employee performance while working remotely over a 9-month period. I think that's pretty amazing that we can get this kind of improvement. Now, one of the links I'm going to give you is a link to this information. And again, I'll send that for those of you who joined after I made this statement. When we're done today, I'm going to send you all a copy of our recording as well as a bunch of resources that I'm going to mention during our time today. So even though the reason why we're all working from home isn't ideal, right? None of us wants to be working home because there's a pandemic. We're not happy about that. How can we make the most of it? You know, two things can be true. There can be this terrible thing going on in the world, this pandemic. We can recognize that, we can take action, and at the same time, we can recognize the benefits that we're realizing, even if they're few and far between, from working remotely. So we're going to cover 3 keys to making working remotely a positive and productive experience. Without the daily face-to-face contact, trust is more vulnerable to a breakdown. This is for sure. To reap the benefits of working remotely while mitigating the challenges, we must be competent in using the available tools and technology. We need to be able to set and manage our expectations so that managers know, that our team knows, that we can do the job with little or no supervision. That becomes even more challenging if we have a new hire. I've talked to several people that they started their job a week or 2 before the shutdown. Others you've hired, or you were hired into a new role, and you've been working remotely the whole time. That onboarding experience, it's not the same as if you have the face-to-face engagement. And so how do you build trust in that environment? How do we do that? And then we have to work extra hard to create connection with our manager and our peers so that the communication and the connection helps us build or maintain and build that trust. And that's going to come down to like frequency and quality of communication. So when you think about those 3 things, it's only 3 things, but that's a pretty tall order. That's a pretty tall order. So let's look at them each one at a time. So key number 1 is mastering tools and technologies. Let's talk tools. Now, this webinar is not here to teach you about these tools. That's not the point. At this, where we are in our stay-at-home, well, we're not in the stay-at-home order, but where we are from working from home, most of us are using, and if you haven't mastered, we are beginning to master some of these. If you have access to annotation, just put a little check on the screen of all of the tools that you're using right now to collaborate. And again, put it in chat if you can't use the annotation tools. WebEx, Skype, Dropbox, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams. A new one I heard of was Blue Jeans. I just found that one the other day, and a friend of mine, their company uses it, and I'd never heard of Blue Jeans. Apparently, it's kind of like Zoom. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I love the name, so I'm going to check it out. Yeah, so we primarily use Dropbox for file sharing. We use Slack for day-to-day communication instead of texting. And the reason why we do that is I love, you can do this in iMessage too, but I love that in Slack I can set my status, I can change my status, and I can also turn off those notifications. for that, you know, I can turn off notifications in iMessage, but I use iMessage for all my friendships and family. And so I don't want to turn off all of that. So Slack is great for that. Obviously, we use Zoom. That's what we're on now. I use Adobe Connect from time to time for the longer, for lengthy training programs as well. So looks like we're all using a lot of the same tools. Lotus Notes I'm seeing in, which is not on screen. Let's see if there's any others on here that don't show up on screen. Looks like we've got them all. Cisco and Jabber, yeah, okay. Awesome, all right, let's clear all of these. So think about this and put it in chat. What is the impact when you or your team members or maybe your boss don't have a demonstrated competency with the tools that your organization is using? What are some problems or what's the impact of that lack of competency? Frustration by other team members, slower to respond, wasted time, delays in getting things started. Absolutely, absolutely. Delays of meetings. What about the double muting? I've done it before. I'm using my phone for my audio because I like to have headphones in. And when I'm not leading a session, sometimes I'll mute my phone and mute myself on Zoom. I'll start talking thinking I'm unmuted on Zoom and I'm still muted on my phone. Janet, you're still muted. That's our famous line from this year, I think. Meetings take longer to get started. We're waiting for people to join the meeting. I have a little tactic for that one. The echo when people are using a speaker on a laptop and don't mute when others speak. Time spent with people asking if they can be heard. Yes. Yes. All of these things can happen. Sometimes I've seen people using more tools than necessary. So, for example, a teleconference bridge in lieu of Skype, or everyone using a different tool that they're most comfortable with. That can create some competency challenges because you've got someone using one tool over here and another tool over here, and competency generally increases the more we do the same thing over and over again. Repetition is key. Another one that I haven't seen mentioned yet, unless I missed it, are things like firewalls. So some of you work for organizations that don't allow for certain uses. Like I know some companies will allow you to join a Zoom, but you can't put out a Zoom link. And when you do join Zoom, you have limited access. So you can't access the annotation tools. So Zoom, I know, has been working on that so more people can utilize it. So the firewall issues can be a problem. And then the other thing to think about is outside vendors and customers, right? You might internally all use WebEx, but now you set up a meeting with, let's say, a new client and they've never used WebEx. So now you're using time on the meeting to try to make sure they understand how to use the tool. So all of these things can create challenges. And I think the big picture here, I want to leave you with a couple thoughts. First and foremost, don't sweat it. Don't sweat it. If you run into technology difficulties, let's say you're running a WebEx or a Zoom or something, and something goes wrong, your PowerPoint fails or your internet drops or something happens, instead of thinking of it as, I know you don't think of it literally as a performance, but a lot of times we get nervous and scared that people are going to be upset that something went wrong with technology. Listen, we're all in this together. We all are having a shared experience around navigating these tools. Instead of thinking of it as a bad performance or a failed performance, think of it as not trying to perform well, but trying to learn well, that as you're going through these experiences, that you're going to learn from it. Ask a tech-savvy friend, get someone to help you. If you are suffering, don't suffer in silence. If you are working in a group and it seems like everyone else has mastered the technology but you, and you're just struggling all the time, make sure you ask. Also, if you're leading others, don't assume that people aren't struggling. Have one-on-ones and ask what they need. Make sure that you that everyone knows how to use the tools and to use them well, to use them to expectations. If you have the capability, if you have the resources, rig your space so that it appears that you have a dedicated space. Someone mentioned this in one of the challenges, which is not having a dedicated space. I know people who have a little tiny desk set up in their bedroom because there's nowhere else in their house to do it, because they have kids working in all the other spaces. And do what you can to have as much of a dedicated space that feels dedicated to you, because you want to have a space then that you can walk away from. This last one is a little bit harder depending on your company, depending on your own personal resources. But that is, if you had a certain setup in the office, try to mimic that as much as you can in your home. It's going to really help you to feel like you're not just sitting at home working, but you can treat it more like an office space. And I say that because not everybody actually has an office space in their home. We converted a spare bedroom for mine. Not everybody has the extra room to do that. Question here, what's the best technology or tool that you use when working from home to maximize your productivity? If you could pick any one of those tools, or one of the tools that maybe wasn't mentioned on screen, which one of those do you think you use when working from home that maximizes your productivity? Throw that in the chat and let me know. I'm curious. And it may be something that's not a technology tool. As far as communication, WebEx Teams, headphones, multiple monitors. Yeah, creating and keeping a schedule. I love that. Electronic notes. Someone mentioned in the last session feeling really nervous about not having access to their paper files. And one of the challenges I faced was moving out of our regular office. I felt like we needed our copy machine, so I paid to have it moved to my house. I barely use it because this has really forced me to use electronic files more than ever, so I love it. Noise canceling headphones, I would agree on that one. OneNote notes. What about an ergonomic chair? I got a used ergonomic chair on Facebook Marketplace because I had a chair that was more just prettier, like aesthetically, it was very pretty in my office, but after sitting on it for several hours a day, I started getting terrible pain in my back and in my right hip. I don't know why the right side, maybe sciatica thing. I was like, nope, I need to have an ergonomic chair. So people have even sat on those balls, a nice firm, there's an ergonomic chair that's a ball basically. A sit stand desk where you can move it up. The desks that convert are super expensive, but you can get these pieces that you can set on your desk that go up and down for around $100 on Amazon, a lot cheaper than a $1,500 desk. Something to think about. So just like in the office, your home office, you want it to be as conducive as possible to getting work done. But what I want to talk about now is one of the tools that we're all at least being exposed to, we may not all be using, and that is video. And I alluded to this in the beginning. This technology tool, I think, is the one that causes some of the most discomfort for people because most of us are not used to being on camera all day long. So even as working from home becomes more common, being on video continues to be something individuals and teams struggle to embrace. And I think it can be awkward, but why do you think the use of video is so crucial to both learning and team communication? Why do you think that is? Again, in the chat. And while you're putting your ideas in, I want to share with you an experience I had. My very first extensive virtual workshop that I put together right after the shutdown happened, I didn't think about asking the client to have their employees to have their cameras on so that we could engage. And we had to have 3 sessions. And so the first session, probably 80% of the people did not have their video on. And there could have been really good reasons for that. There might even been hardware issues for that. But I realized if we could set an expectation that unless there is some discomfort level that they want to express to their employer or lack of hardware, because at this time it was early enough, not everybody had the right hardware at home to have a camera, that we wanted as many people to use their cameras as possible. And I really like the approach of making the request and then modeling it from leadership rather than by making a demand, which is why I recommend to be the example. Be the example to your folks. I don't think it's helpful to make people feel guilty about not going on video. And here's some of the things that you said that are benefits of this. Body language. You can make eye contact. You can gauge the facial reactions, the emotions. You do get a lot more from it than just a text. It helps to see a human face. You can actually tell if people are actively listening and if you're being heard. And then, yes, as we've said, the communication is so much more than words. I've been on sessions before where I kid you not, someone has had their, like I have my desktop right here, they have their camera on and the entire time they're over here on a laptop typing. And no criticism if anyone needs to do that. The point is that as a facilitator or if I'm running a meeting, it does communicate, whether intended or not, that this is not important. We probably wouldn't do it in a face-to-face meeting. So my recommendation is if you wouldn't do it while you're in the same room with everyone, we wouldn't want to do it in an electronic or virtual setting. So my encouragement to you is to be the example, get on camera, model the appropriate, whatever attire fits with your culture at your employer that matches, who you are authentically. And don't be overly concerned about interruptions from dogs, kids, and the doorbell. We want to actually normalize those things because it causes a lot of stress and anxiety to try to eliminate them. And so they should just be expected. And this actually makes you more human, and it gives everyone else permission to be more human. And that's why I love this quote from Ken Blanchard that the key to successful leadership is influence, not authority. Sure, you could demand everyone have their camera on during your meetings, but the more effective way and the way that builds trust is to influence that by saying, this is my preference, and then by modeling it. And then if you have folks that are consistently not using their camera during your meetings, talk to them one-on-one, see if there are barriers, see if there are things you can help them with and develop them around that and have some patience around it. So the second key is to set and manage expectations. And this has to do with setting boundaries. And I know this is a challenge because the lines can get pretty blurred between work and home in a lot of different areas. So let's take a look at this scenario. Earlier in the day, you sent a presentation to your manager. You received an email from your manager with feedback and questions shortly before going to bed that night. What do you do? So again, in chat, just put 1, 2, 3, or 4 so you don't have to type that whole sentence, and then use annotate, put a check on the screen if you have access to those tools. What do? You sent a presentation during the day, and then you got an email from your manager with feedback and questions shortly before going to bed. What would you do? Got several 1s and 2s coming in the chat. Open up your laptop and address the feedback and questions, or respond with a short email that says you got the feedback and we'll address it first thing in the morning. What email? I don't look at email outside my working schedule. Don't respond, but worry that you aren't being responsive. See if there's any, if it's not urgent, wait till tomorrow. Teresa, but my laptop is always open. That's a good point, Sarah. It depends what it is. It depends what it is. Yep. 2 or 3 says Andrew, either short email or what email. Yeah. All right, let's clear these. So I do believe boundaries are good. And instead of telling you, I'm not going to go back here and say, you should do number 3 or you should do number 4 or whatever, because I don't think that having someone tell you what is the right and wrong way is necessary. Each of you have different culture and different expectations at your workplace, and you have a set of values. Who do you want to be in that environment, both for your family and for yourself? How important is this presentation? How urgent are the questions? All of those things can impact what you do. But I do think boundaries are good. So here are some ideas on boundaries. So setting a defined working schedule, whether you block it off on your calendar so that you don't check or respond to email. I do this at a specific time on Monday mornings, not so that I can goof around in the morning, but it's when I actually set everything up that I need to prep for some specific meetings that happen every Monday afternoon. And I make sure I look at the rest of my week and I'm totally prepared. I block that time on my calendar so that no one schedules anything during that time. And I don't check email until that block is over. And it took some discipline because I want to jump right in, but I'm telling you what, by doing it this way, I'm much more effective the rest of the week. Pretending you're not home, what that means is, even though you're in an at-home office, thinking in terms of, not home, but office. Closing your door if able, taking ample breaks, turn off notifications after hours, and quit at a quitting time. I have a rule for myself that I don't ask my staff questions after hours because I don't want them to think that I want the question answered after hours. I can think of only a few true emergencies where I needed to contact them, and I always make sure I apologize. But that's me. That's something that's important to me. Now, what I used to do was I wanted to get it off my mind. So what I would do is I would send the email at 8 o'clock at night, but I would say, don't worry, I don't need you to respond. And every time they would respond that evening. Make sure you're setting the example by your actions. Remember, talk is cheap. If we say, I don't want you to respond in the evening, then we need to model by not communicating in the evening, unless, of course, that is part of your work schedule. What I do is I write up a draft email, and then I put a reminder in Trello, which is another tool that we use, so that I remember to send the email the next morning, so I don't forget it in my drafts. That way, I'm not communicating to my staff that it's okay to be contacting one another in the evenings. It also communicates a boundary from me, which is I don't really want to be contacted in the evening unless it's a true emergency. But I don't necessarily have to say that because I'm modeling behavior that I want to see. And that's what creates our culture. That may not work for you. What's important is you choose boundaries that are in alignment with who you are, your authentic self, the culture, the expectations of your employer, but nonetheless set those boundaries. And yet, many of us are balancing children, all of their needs. So sometimes those boundaries go out the window. Many of us end up working later hours than we have ever had before because we're taking this flexibility time during the day. And then that means maybe our during the day work hours are flexing into the evening. And there's really a lot of true integration going on between work and life. It's important that we give ourselves breaks. We're not used to, like I said, being in front of a camera all day. It can be very taxing. It feels like we're on all the time. And so I want to encourage you to be empathetic, not only to others, but really to yourself first. You might need to just go for a 10-minute walk to kind of break up the time and to not look at this anymore as a traditional work day. And then, of course, we've got the kiddos at home, maybe college students. You might have multiple people working from home. This may require a schedule, some clearer guidelines on hygiene, especially if they are in the background of a video. And what we mean by that, the specificity is, if we're working from home, nobody's walking around in their underwear, so to speak. And I hate to be so direct, but, that can help avoid some of those faux pas that we've seen on social media. It's kind of getting those expectations within our home set and agreed upon and having that alignment. We make no assumptions. So what are some minimum standards or guidelines you could set so you could be more mindful and more intentional and better integrate work and life? And when I use the term better, what I'm thinking of is in a way that makes sense for you so that you don't feel like your family is suffering and you don't feel like your productivity is suffering at work. What are some minimum standards or guidelines you think you could set? So really what I'm asking you right now is not to get aspirational, but to make a commitment. So put an idea of something you'd be willing to commit to setting a minimum guideline, just one thing you could think of. You might think of multiple things, but I'd like you to pick one. Having a designated start and stop time. I like that one. That's good, James. It takes discipline, but it can be done. The big one I had to implement, I was just going to say that, Angela, thank you. I close my laptop. I don't work later than 6 o'clock. It literally is 6 o'clock. Sometimes I finish earlier than that. But right now I'm on a desktop. But what I do is I turn the computer off. It just signals, it's like a psychological signaling that we are done here. And then I walk out of this room and I shut the door. Not everyone has a separate space like that. However, you can create that separation. Taking breaks, walking away from mental health, yep. That's a great one to work on. It's a great commitment, Samantha. Let's see if we can see one or two more and then we'll move on. A couple other ideas I came up with. They're not on screen. Well, wait, did I put them on the next slide? No. Only work, here's an idea, committing to only working into the, let's say you can't get away from working till 7 or 8 o'clock some nights. Maybe start to scale it back to where you say, okay, I'm only going to do that 2 times to get a little bit more, I don't think work-life balance exists, so I don't like using that term, but get a little bit more ebb and flow where you feel like you're still getting enough time with your family and you're still being productive at work. Sometimes making food in advance, doing a little bit of meal planning might help the frequent trips to the fridge. You know, you won't be grazing anymore. Like, what do I eat? I'm hungry. Instead, you know exactly what to eat. You can just grab it. This might seem counterintuitive, but taking a couple hours off during the day, breaking up your day a little bit differently. I started starting my day a little bit earlier, taking a little bit of a break in the middle of the day, not today because I'm with you, but I will afterwards. And then I finish my day at 6 o'clock. So it's sort of a longer day, but I need more of a break in between. Some other things you could think about, especially if you're a manager of others, is thinking through dress code. Does it need to be strictly business? Can it be business casual? Getting alignment on that and communicating it. A lot of people are not thinking about that. So I like that you mentioned that, Les, getting into my dress clothes every day. Okay, so let's move on. What we give attention to grows. And the reason why I mentioned this and included this quote was because sometimes if what we're focused on is how we don't have boundaries and all we do is complain about and think about our lack of boundaries, the attention we're giving to those lack of boundaries is actually causing those lack of boundaries to grow. Why? Because paying attention to them from a complaining standpoint and doing nothing about them doesn't change anything. So let's give attention to at least one new boundary we can establish that gets us closer to our work-life balance goals. Let's give that attention. And that's what I wanted you to do there, was just pick one to give some attention to. Okay, the last key, I could even argue that it might be the most important, and that's communicate and connect more. Working remotely can be isolating. That's for sure. It's easy to feel remote when you are in fact remote. This is where you may need more, may need to be more proactive and work to preserve connections that you had before you were working from home. So the effort that it took for you to maintain connections in the workplace, they have to increase. We've got to double down. So what do? Here's a scenario. One of your teammates knocks on your office door with a quick question. Remember, we're in 2019. You're in the middle of working on a report that's due tomorrow. What do you do? What do? Do you answer their question or tell her to come back? And then the other scenario is you receive a chat from one of your teammates while working at home. You're in the middle of working on a report that's due tomorrow. What do you do? So put it in chat if you can't annotate, mark on screen if you can. Answer the question, respond to the chat. Some of you would ignore it and respond later. Here's the key. Do what you would do if you were in the office. If normally someone could walk in your door and say, hey, I've got a quick question for you, and it is really quick, and you would have entertained that, then do that over chat or over text, because that's more than likely in alignment with how you naturally show up at work. But if you're continually ignoring and not responding, and that's not normally like you in person, then it's going to seem kind of disconnected from who you normally are, and there'll be unmet expectations. So you just want to do what you normally do. I will give you one caveat. Because we're not together in the workplace, ignoring and not responding too much could unintentionally give the impression that you're not getting things done, which may not be the case. Remember, people can't see you in your office working on the report. So one piece of advice might be to send them a quick chat that says, I can't respond now, but I will later. I'm working on something that's due. That way you at least can communicate, but you're letting them know that you can't answer their question right now. That goes a long way to building trust. And the fact that you may need to do that does not necessarily mean the other person doesn't trust you and that they're micromanaging you. It just means that because we're not face-to-face together, we have to take extra steps to protect and to build the trust that we've had that was already built previously. Some communication and connection ideas at home: to use text and chat to be social. So one of the ways we do this at Relay is we use Slack for just our day-to-day communication, but we have a channel that's just for fun. So we'll throw goofy memes in there, funny quips, little things that, I'll throw a picture. They haven't come in here yet. They happen to be napping, but I have 2 puppies that are always doing funny things. And sometimes in the middle of the day, I'll take a picture of that and send that to my team and say, you're not going to believe what the dogs did. These are things that you can do to be social. Does it replace sitting around the water cooler and sharing stories? Absolutely not. But it can create more of that social connection. Continue or start one-on-ones with your manager and or your direct reports, if at all possible. You may not be able to do them weekly, depending on how many direct reports you have. But if you can, introduce that. Bring your pets and children on camera, introduce them. Let's make this normal. Let's not make this something where we have to hide who's at our house and be afraid that the toddler's going to come in and start, jabbering about something. Let's normalize this in the new workspace. And if that feels uncomfortable to you as a leader, maybe warm up to that. Send more emails than you normally do to update the team. Over communicate. And if you're afraid that your over communication is going to seem like micromanagement, the best way to overcome that is in your over communication, express your intent. My intent is not to micromanage you. My intent is to make sure that you have everything you need to be successful with this project, this task, etc. Please let me know if you need this, if you need more emails, less emails, but don't fail to connect and fail to email or fail to chat just because you're afraid it's too much. More than likely, it's not quite enough. Do take time in meetings for small talk. Use the video as much as you're comfortable and adjust your status so that people know if you're busy or do not disturb. But the warning is don't always be busy or do not disturb, because that might communicate that you're never available. So let's move on here. So it can be more difficult to build trust when you don't see each other face to face and you miss out on the casual interactions in the office. We call this the trust model, and we go into it more in our Leading Virtually program. Building trust as a remote worker has to do with, are you able to still get your work done? Are you believable? In other words, don't be online, but show offline. We want to have integrity. Are we connected? Can we go on video? Can we kind of deal with the tension we feel around video if we're one of those people that's not on video very much? And are we dependable? Are we showing up on time? Are we being responsive while we're remote? If you could pick one of these to work on, just throw it on in chat. Is there one of these that you think you would like to work on a little bit more, where you're like, I definitely am showing that I'm offline when I'm actually online, and it's because I'm trying to get more things done, and I see now that maybe it's affecting my external integrity, or maybe it's affecting my connectedness. Pick one of these in this trust model that you think you could work on: able, believable, connected, or dependable. Go on video more often. Yeah, connected. That connected is for me too, because I'm a doer. I just do. And so I constantly have to remind myself to stay connected to my team. I'm doing pretty good at it, but it is something I have to be conscious and intentional with. Yep. Connected is the big one for everyone. Real communication happens when people feel safe, and this is whether they are in person or virtual. So again, if ever you're wondering about the frequency of your communication, include your intention, and that will help people feel safe. We're not going to fill this out. It was never intended to be filled out. You're going to get a copy of these and you can use it yourself. But what this is for is to think about ways that what you can commit to today around these 3 keys of working remotely, what you'll do this week, and what you will do if this is a permanent situation for you. Some of you may have already learned that it's permanent, but others of you may not know yet. And so I want you to think about that what if environment. What if this is a permanent situation? What are some things I'm willing to commit to work on? I told you I'm going to give you some resources. This is going to come to you in an email. You're going to get, it'll be a link, a working virtually ebook. It'll have most of what's been in this slide deck. 4 areas to address in your coronavirus working virtually strategy, 7 common reactions to change and how to respond to them, and epic fails from a career remote worker. That one's good. And then another resource is just our podcast. I host a podcast called the Slackcast. It's not all on working virtually, of course, but it's just another leadership resource, professional resource if you'd like to check that out. So I'll send you all of those links. If you in particular are a supervisor, a frontline manager, really if you're leading anyone virtually and you want to take a really deep dive into the nuts and bolts of building trust and leading virtually, we do have it's a 6-hour workshop. It's split into 3 2-hour sessions. It's called Leading Virtually. And there are 3 practices that we cover in that workshop. Being present and mindful. We always at Relay want to start with the mindset. We make decisions from, we react, and we feel from our mindset. And so we're going to start there. And then how do we foster the community that we so desire and so miss? And then how, in the midst of all of this, do we accelerate, not just maintain, but accelerate the development of our people? That workshop's only $150 a person. What we normally do is bring a group of you together from an employer, and we do it privately with you, so be with your team. It can, there's really no maximum number. The reason why we like 5 people, we would do 4, but the reason why we like 4 or 5 people is for conversation, for discussion, because we like to keep, this way we turn on our mics and we actually get to talk to one another. So if you're interested in that, or if you have any questions for me, want to contact me for any reason, here's my email, which you will already get when I send you my little email today. This is our number. And I'm going to go ahead and just exit out of this so that I can rejoin all of you here. And I just want to thank you all for just spending an hour with me today. I've got 2 minutes to spare. If anyone has any questions or comments they'd like to throw into the chat, you can do it now, and we will definitely end right at 1. I'll wait a minute to see if any of those get populated. But like I said, I'll be sending you an email with all that follow-up and all of those resources. Wait just about 30 seconds here and see if anybody has any questions for me.
Shannon, I just want to thank you for doing such a great job and sharing this. This is something that's really kind of at the top of everyone's priority list, is learning how to work remotely, but also working with a team remotely. It's all new for us. So these are some really good points, and I appreciate you sharing everything.
My pleasure, Samantha. Thanks so much for your kind words. I appreciate it.
Sure.
You're welcome, Rebecca. Thank you for your comment. We've got about a minute left. Feel free to hop off if you're done. Thanks, Jason. Sandra, Lauren, very kind of you. Les, thank you. Yes, we are all in that same situation. Very helpful. Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks for being here, everyone. All right, you all have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon, and maybe I'll see you soon somewhere on camera. Have a great day.